So
Uh,
very excited to introduce Mr. Chris Haraden, editor of the Hull Times. He was actually one of the first people I reached out to, and he agreed to come on. And we could certainly get into a whole bunch of different topics. We're not going to do that. The purpose of this is to learn about you, your family history, your connection to Hull, um, and your story. So welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate this, and I appreciate the fact that you asked to do it, and the what you're doing here, what the three of you are doing, I think is a much needed outlook or look into what people are doing. The I've listened to and watched the other podcasts and some really interesting people. Of course, I know Peter very well. Peter Menace was your first guest. Um, he's just wild. He could talk about everything and just his history and his background is so great. And then Joe Berkeley, um, again, you could listen to him talk all day long about, you didn't get into half of the stuff that, he could really
Do
talk.
hours. Yeah, you could do
Yes.
hours.
And then was it Patricia?
Oh God, yeah,
Yeah.
Patricia
She
Lambert.
was fascinating. I could listen to her talk all day long.
She was just brilliant.
Yeah. And this is the great thing about Hull, about, there's so many people here, people like, Jerry who grew up here, people like me who grew up here, people who moved here for various reasons and are bringing with them all of those perspectives and all those things. So you had asked what the connection to Hull is. Do you just want me to roll into where we started?
Absolutely. I think what we should do is maybe just introduce Jake and Kim real quick, and
Oh, sure.
Okay.
you
For
know,
them?
Yeah, so this is episode 4 of the Hull Heartbeat. And Jared kicked us off, and I'm Jake Valancourt. And Chris, we're really excited to have you on episode 4. What doesn't really matter what episode number it is, we're excited. And I'll hand it off to Kim.
Kim Kingston. I sublet at office space that I don't think you're ever in at the Hull Times.
Like
So
me
I-
on the field, Kim. That's my goal.
no, I'm not judging you for not being. It's in 2026. I mean, I'm on the road a lot. My connection to Hull, my very first apartment when I was in my early 20s was where I live now, and I
Really?
left here, and so I lived here probably 1991 to 1994. I left and saw the world. I lived in Waltham, Quincy, Boston, different neighborhoods. Last being Dorchester, originally from Dorchester. And my mom, unfortunately, got Alzheimer's, and my stepfather was overwhelmed. And I said, I will come back to Hull if I can live where I lived when I lived in my early 20s. He went out for a bike ride, and there was a for rent sign on the same place. where I
Really?
live. So I've literally come full circle. So I do not think I'm leaving this time. And it's the only place that I ever lived that I cried when I left. I remember pulling out that night. We live in paradise. We do. It's beautiful. And so that's my full circle story. And then I'll hand it off to you.
Well, as Jerry knows, you get out, but then they pull you back in, right? That if you can't always, you can't always resist the pull. So like I grew up in Hull. I don't live in Hull now. I live in Hanover. But we're in Hull, more so than we ever are anywhere else because our families are still there. Our family is there. My family moved to Hull in the 30s. My grandfather, the Italian side of my family, grew up in West Corner. They had a farm just over the Hingham line.
Yeah.
But they were part of in that section of Hull. It's got Hull, Hingham, Cohasset all right in there. They were part of like what we would now or refer to as Nantasket. Everything was there. They went to church at St. Mary's in Hull. They were, always crossing over the line, because they were right there. They're right at the line. And so then when my grandfather got married, they moved to Hull because he worked at Paragon Park and he wanted to have a place where he could walk to work. So he literally in the shadow of the roller coaster was where he moved our family. And my mother, I say this all the time, my mother has lived on the same street in Hull for 80 years.
Oh my goodness.
So
1935.
she probably doesn't want me to say, but yeah,
Approximately.
Wow.
that range. Actually,
Wow.
a couple of years later, 1937. But she grew up there in the house that my grandparents lived in. And aside from a little bit of time in my father was in the army and stationed in Germany. They lived abroad for a couple of years. When they came home, they went to go live with her parents, looking for a place to live in Hull. And just so happened, like him, like you, fate intervened, and the house next door went up for sale. And so they bought the house next door, and that's where I grew up. So my mother moved about 50 feet down the road to the next house and has lived there since 1950, whatever, 58, 59. So it's been a place that, you know, has seen a lot of changes, and my perspective, you know, I start from the 70s into the 80s into the 90s, but because of that background, because she's been here that long, I get that perspective of, you know, what things were like then. And my grandfather was a Hull police officer for many years, in addition to working at Paragon Park. So this is the era when, you know, the man of the house worked a job or two or three. So he worked at Paragon during the day, and he worked the midnight to 8 shift as a police officer for 30 years. So, and the reason that I got involved in history and involved in wanting to preserve history was just listening to his stories. He was, Jerry, I think as an Italian, you can attest to this. There are two kinds of Italian men: those who never stop talking, and those who don't talk a lot. Was of the kind that didn't talk a lot, but when he
You
did,
bring as much Italian into this conversation as we feel comfortable with.
freaking,
I speak a little bit if you want to go down that road.
oh, I wish,
I was going to say Jerry's in the first category.
I would, yeah, well, yeah. But he
right.
didn't speak a lot. He didn't talk a lot, but when he did, it was meaningful to me. And I sat and listened to his stories, and, you know, talking about the way things were and the people he knew, and just being involved in being a police officer, but being also, you know, involved with Paragon, like that. It was so fascinating to me. And I wish, I say this all the time, I wish I had a tape recorder and had just turned it on just to record those stories, because, you know, I try to remember some of the stuff and I can't. But that was how I sort of got involved with learning about Hull's history. And there was a great group of people at that time too, that he knew, that he connected me with, who, there was names that you may know, Police Chief Short, Dan Short was a big name, and he was involved in the Historical Society. So I got involved in the Historical Society when I was a teenager. Got involved in, I was appointed to the Historical Commission in Hull when I was 13, because it was, you know, public service was important to my family, and my dad, and both my dad and my mom, you know, pushed us toward being involved. And, you know, part of their thought was that if you're involved in the community, if you are, you know, benefiting from the community, you should give back to the community. So I got involved in that, and then and got to know some great people too. You know, people who beyond, you know, I always say this, like, you know, I'm an old soul, and, you know, but I always gravitated toward people who were older than I was and could share that kind of knowledge. So a lot of these names that he knew were people who, even as a young person, I was interacting with and getting the benefit of their knowledge, which was great. And then wanting to know a little bit more about how things worked. My dad was involved in town government. He was a member of what used to be called the Finance Committee. I think it's now the Advisory Board. And he was involved, worked in the insurance business and was involved in the Insurance Study Committee. They really kind of learned a lot about what was happening in government. And, you know, as kids, we were always handing out flyers for some cause, or holding signs for some candidate, or, you know, being pressed into service somehow. There was something going on. During the blizzard of 1978, we were brought up to the old Damon School, where people were, that was where you went to sort of find out about disaster aid. And, we were bringing coffee to people back and forth, bringing papers from office to office as people were trying to figure these things out. And my dad ended up being the co-chair of Hull Appreciation Day. I don't know if you remember that, Jerry.
Not sure.
Happened at the Warwick Mansion, of all places. It was
I don't know what it is.
what's that?
I don't know what that is.
So the Warwick was an old hotel. And again, if you want to talk about Hull history, I could go on for 3 hours if you got time. But
That's why we're here.
one of the oldest hotels that was one of the first hotels built in Hull, right at West Corner. It's now Paul Grada's construction yard right across from the entrance to the Hull.
Sure.
But there was a kind of a house-ish type hotel function area. And then there was a big field there, big yard there. And what they did was invited back people who, during the blizzard, Hull was devastated, completely devastated. And people came from all over. People came from Amish country. People came from all these different places to help. The Red Cross, all these different organizations. And I don't remember the genesis of it. I don't remember how it came about, but the people of Hull were the only people in Massachusetts that got together and wanted to say thank you in some way for all of these people that came to help. They were pumping out basements and moving, damaged furniture and stuff out of people's houses. So they had a day for them. They started, it was like a festival type of atmosphere. They had a day at Paragon Park. They did all this kind of stuff. And anyway, my dad was one of the, he was the co-chair of that event with someone else in town. It sort of was inspiring a little bit because they sort of saw something and decided that they wanted to figure out a way to do something. And it turned, the whole idea of the blizzard, people always are talking about, it's the weather, it's the snow, but it was the sense of community and the sense of coming together as a result of that was really the legacy of that. So those are the sorts of things that were going on. And what that precipitated was my wanting to be involved in writing about this sort of stuff. I had always had an interest in writing and wanting to be involved in sort of explaining how things worked and what happened. History was part of that. There's a lot of, kind of chronicling history. But a friend of mine, Seth Gattell, whose name some may know, was involved at the newspaper at the time, and with Susan Ovens, who used to own the Times, and before that, the News Weekly. I can also give you the history of the paper if you want to get involved in that too. That's another good one. But she took a chance on a 16-year-old kid who said, hey, do you think I could write something for you? And it started out as getting involved in writing about the Beach Management Committee had just started then, and it was something that was new. And I think probably I'll give her credit, something that if I did a horrible job, it probably no one would really know, so it wasn't something that was vital to the operation of the paper. But it worked out, and I started to cover that, and then school news, as which was kind of hard being a student, but also talking about the school, covering the school committee, going and talking to adults, because I had that background. I was able to do that, with the history stuff. So I was able to be comfortable doing that, and I learned a ton just about open meeting laws, public record laws, how government worked, and I think there was a lot of movement then, or a lot of emphasis then on teaching people about government. Not just me as a kid, but just, when you went to town meeting, it was explained to you how it worked, and you could understand better about what the process was. Because, we're unique in not Hull being unique, but Massachusetts is unique. That if you're coming, California,
You own towns and cities.
right. And if you're coming from, county government somewhere, it's just totally foreign to you. You have no idea how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was something that was interesting and led to me wanting to be more involved. And I began to like it. I began to understand more about government and how it all worked and how it all fit together. And the Times has been I said this paper called the News Weekly, which people don't really know what that is. It was there was a long sort of history of the Times. It's been around since 1930. And Susan worked there for a bit, and there was a period of time where, because of the development that was happening in Hull in the 1980s, the current owner, or the then owner of the paper, wanted to go in one direction, and Susan was writing editorials in a different direction. She was looking for more controlled development, some lower density, lower building heights. And the owner of the paper was supportive of the other side of it, because the buildings that were originally proposed were a lot taller than what was actually built. So,
Right.
I can't even imagine that.
18 stories was the original.
Well, I can't even imagine that.
It's kind of hard to fathom, but yes. So there was a difference there of opinion, and as a result, Susan, they parted ways. I always like to say, she always says, well, she got fired. She left. So her idea was that it was in the spring of 1986, and there was a period of time and then when a lot of decisions were coming up at town meeting, and a lot of election hoopla was going on. There was a recall of the planning board on the table, and people were going to be deciding what type of zoning restrictions might be put in place. So she started a paper called the Hull News Weekly, which is available at the library. We're working on getting it digitized so that people can read it. And the original idea was that she was just going to do it as a short term, just to sort of get another perspective out, about these sorts of issues. And it caught on. People started to like it, and people started to get involved in it. And so it became not just the second newspaper in Hull, but the third, if you can believe it, a third newspaper in Hull. The South Shore Chronicle existed, the Hull Nantasket Times existed, and then the News Weekly. So again, I'm going way off track here. I hope
That's okay. You'll bring it back together.
All right.
I think great.
Yeah, Jay can edit it as needed.
Okay.
So then, after that sort of happened, the Chronicle closed for other reasons. The owners there decided to retire, and there were two papers, and one of them went through an ownership change. The owner, David Dre, another guy who grew up in Hull, got divorced, and his wife had ownership of the paper, didn't quite really know what she wanted to do with it. Her background was in law. She was a paralegal. They merged the papers in 1989. So the News Weekly and the Hull Nantasket Times became the Hull Times. So I had been working for the News Weekly along with others, and we all sort of became one big happy family, and you sort of never left after that. Even though, we went on to other things, and for a while I was a full-time editor there. But then the mechanics and the business model of news has changed so much over the years. If you look at some of those papers, we were 28, 32 pages with ads, tons of ads. We were filling it with, we had multiple columnists, and we had all sorts of things, because again, this was at the golden era, not the golden era, but the era of news without any other distribution channel. So if you look at the way that news has changed,
Mm-hmm.
The newspaper business used to be based on, 4 or 5 things: real estate ads, automotive ads, help wanted ads, department store ads, and then subscriptions. And those first 4 categories basically are gone. The people go on the internet; they're not looking at newspapers.
I tell people a story. When I graduated college in 1989, same time frame, right? The Boston Globe help wanted was I mean, it was 50 pages, maybe.
Oh yeah, it took a whole Sunday just to
Oh,
read
yeah.
through it.
My first job was a tiny little ad out of the Patriot Ledger
Yeah.
in 1988.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's all gone now. So those dollars aren't coming into the news business. And then the other part, think about it, not so much in Hull, I mean, little weekly papers are a little bit different, but if you think of it on a grander scale, there used to be, I'm going to throw out some names that, you may know or may not know, but like, Kresge's, Grant's, Remix, Filene's, Jordan Marsh,
Collins.
right, Pat Caldor, all these places that once advertised, they're gone. So nobody advertised those businesses. And then real estate, now it's search only on, on online for that. Automotive, same thing. You go on to and you enter what you want for a car and you get it. So subscriptions were the only things that are left. Well, subscriptions were never made. They were never the only type of support that made it sustainable. So that's why you always could have like different papers would have subscription wars. I have 1 year for a penny or something like that, because it didn't matter because they had all this other advertising. So that's the challenge that we have, is that we never had the big ads, but a lot of businesses are advertising or doing things online. So the papers have shrunk. And in other towns across the South Shore, the papers have either gone away or have consolidated into something that is not really local anymore. And I don't mean just regional. I mean, you open up the Hingham, I think it's called the Hingham Journal still, it might not be.
It is.
Right. You pick that up and there's a story in there about something that's going on in Gloucester or, Lincoln or Concord. It's not the way it used to be. You didn't mind picking up the Patriot Ledger and reading about other towns around you because there was some relevance there. Something was happening in Hingham that may affect Hull. But you're now picking that up and reading about either a national story from USA Today, because they're now owned by USA Today, or something that's happening on the Cape, and it just doesn't work. That's really.
I want to go back to just one thing.
Yeah.
From your story, your grandfather must have been working at Paragon Park during World War II. Was he enlisted?
No, he was. Yeah, so he was.
Was the park open during World War II?
It was. He was part of that. He was in the National Guard, but he didn't deploy. He wasn't overseas. He was here. He was an air raid warden. We have, the civil defense helmet we had for a while. They did operate on a limited scale. They couldn't use the lighting that they usually, lit, which I always think is funny about how, during World War II, they had the blackout periods. You had to have your blackout shades, and they would cover like the top half of your headlights on your cars, because they didn't want to show off where the coastline was. So Boston Light, was shut down for a while. But then just over the line in Hingham, the shipyard is going 24 hours a day, so the light didn't really kind of make a lot of sense. But yeah, he was here during that period. So he was on the police force during World War II.
That sounds like a novel.
It really does.
It'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Again, I wish I had all those stories. There was a cool story about him that, some things come out when you meet people who knew him or knew things and knew about him. And he was a quiet guy when didn't really talk a lot about himself. But there was a story about, and I don't know if it's true, but I'm going to say it's true because I love it. He was sent down to a Frankie Avalon concert at the Surf Ballroom to break up a fight, and was thrown through a plate glass window and almost fell down those stairs. I don't know if you remember those stairs.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
Oh, sure I do.
But it was cool. And we have a great picture of him because one of the things that he enjoyed I talked about public service. with my parents, my dad and my mom, he didn't rise above the level of police officer. He didn't go to become a captain or a sergeant or whatever, because his thought was he wanted to be out with people, and he wanted to be part of like one of the things that he did, one of his jobs or one of his roles, because he was at night, they would walk the beat, and they would walk Kinburma. He would walk along where the WBZ tower was, because they used to broadcast from there, sometimes during that period during the summer. So sometimes he'd be on the radio, talking to the guy, because they had nothing else to do down there. But say, oh, here's Officer Infacino. Let's see what he has to say. But he would walk, and they would check the summer houses. They would check the doors, of people's houses. And we have a great picture of him with my uncle, his son, playing football for Hull. Him in his uniform, his police uniform, and my uncle in his Pirates uniform, because he was the guy standing, at the detail for the game. And it's kind of cool. He loved that. He loved that.
Old photos, like, just fascinated by them.
They're good. And it's
hours at Pasquale's shop. Oh my goodness, I love
yes. And what's fun too is to look at the pictures of what you see, but then to look in the backgrounds and see what's in there too, because sometimes you can pick up things that you just don't see. Like we had one, for example, I told you my mom went to, I didn't say this. She went to the old Damon School, not the new Damon School, which is now the old Damon School.
Whoa. There's an old Damon School?
The wooden one. Yeah. The one that was, before our time. It was the Damon School. I went to the Damon School that is now condominiums. She went to the one prior to that. And it was right in the parking lot, essentially across from Town Hall, but it was very small. And I actually have a picture of it somewhere I can show you. So they would go for assemblies, and they would have dances at Town Hall, which the second floor of Town Hall was an open auditorium.
Wow.
If you go up to Town Hall now and look at the, where the building offices and the assessor's office, those are all just, fake walls. Those are just put up there.
Yep.
Oh, there's a balcony on the third floor if you go up, and there was a stage there at one point. But that's where that was built for like a town meeting. It was built for that sort of thing. So she remembers that. She remembers going there for, assemblies and for that kind of stuff. And I did find a picture we were looking at. It was a group of some church group or something like that. And it was in an auditorium, and I was trying to figure out where could this be? And it turned, it was one of those ones where you stop being a detective. You look at the windows to see like the shape of the windows and what's there. It was in that second floor of Town Hall. I've never seen a picture of that. And it was because the police station used to be on the first floor of Town Hall, where the town clerk's office is and where the town manager's office is.
It looks a little bit like a police station down.
It's Barney Miller. I have a picture of my grandfather. It looks like Barney Miller.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
The desk.
Hal Linden, is that right?
Yeah, horrifying desks. They probably are still there. The poor people are working with them. But that's why across the way in the select board's meeting room, the town clerk used to be across there, which is why the safe is in there, because that was the town clerk's office. But everything kind of switched, when they built that downstairs police. Because I remember walking, when I walked to school, we used to walk by, and my grandfather would be in the window, looking out at you. Because those were the days, you could walk places, but we had to walk a certain path. You had to go down from my house to the Damon School. You could walk, but if you had to sort of walk by Neil's gas station, which was on the corner of Atlantic and Nantasket Avenue. It's now the bait shop, because Mr. Neil was a family friend. And then when you walk up the hill, is it Atlantic Tire is there now? That was Mr. Minnelli's garage. So if you ever had a problem, Mr. Minnelli would help. And then you walk by the police station where my grandfather would, and then you could get to school. So there was always a way to get there. And if you wanted to go to the beach, you had to walk down through Paragon while it was open, which I think was probably where the creepy people were, not necessarily out on the streets, but you had to go through there because that was where we knew people who were there, who were going to help us. And
I was
no,
going to ask you if your grandfather ever conveyed to you anything about, Hull being really, because it must have been wild back then. I mean, I saw the tail end of it.
yeah,
I graduated in '84. What year did you graduate? And I know you're a little bit.
I
younger.
graduated in 1988.
Yep.
Yeah.
83.
See?
Yeah, your
Were you
background
born
as your background as a historian of Paragon Park is like untouched. You were on the roller coaster, right? The last time
Yeah, that was
before it
part
was
of
dismantled.
Yeah, so that was kind of a cool story. I got involved in that with well, first of all, I skipped school on the day of the auction to go to the auction. And my mother just found that out about 2 years ago. She didn't realize that I had skipped
That's awesome.
because there was we were talking with someone, and I remember saying, "Oh yeah, I was standing next to you when that, there was a picture, and I was just out of the frame of the picture." And my mother said, "What were you doing there?" I said, well, yeah, I was there. But part of being involved with the history folks was the roller coaster, as we kind of now know, and some people may not know. There were two things that were saved, local or major saves from Paragon. One was the carousel, which was moved down the street. The other was the roller coaster, which was purchased by an amusement park in Maryland and taken down piece by piece and moved, which is kind of interesting when you think of it. There's a whole subculture of wooden roller coaster people. They love this stuff because it, as I was talking to people, I found out it would have cost them about $2 million to build a roller coaster from scratch in 1985, 86. But it cost them $2 million to take one down and ship it, 450 miles south. But they had the history of that roller coaster. So they hired a company, which there are companies out there that will take down your roller coaster for you and go rebuild it somewhere else. But they also hired a guy, his name is Art Milmore. He's passed away a couple of years ago. He was an amateur photographer. And I was introduced to him by someone I knew, and he said, "Hey, I got this assignment. I need someone to carry my camera bag. What do you think?" And I said, "Okay, well, what's the job? What are you doing?" And he said, "We're taking pictures of the roller coaster." And I thought, "Oh, cool. We're going to walk around and follow these guys around, just from the ground, taking pictures of them." And he starts like going up the ramp and getting on the track and starts like walking up the hill. And I'm like, where are you going? He said, "No, this is our job. We have to go and take pictures of, like placement of where everything was," which is insane to me because they had the blueprints, but they wanted that idea. So we did. And I'm afraid of heights. But when you get that opportunity ever again, to do something crazy like that. So the picture that Jerry's talking about is he took a great shot of me standing at the top of the roller coaster. And I actually have a picture of my grandfather at that very spot from the other direction, like looking that way.
Well, that's awesome.
When he was working on it. And it was really kind of cool. It was neat. And we didn't walk down the big drop, but we walked all around and we took pictures and, he had them. I had a little tiny, this is 1985. So I had this little tiny camera. He had the big lenses that were in the bag and everything. But it was neat. It was a lot of fun. And it was something that, you could say I never did before, and would never get the opportunity to do again. And then, this past year, as some of you probably remember, and some of the people watching know, that park in Maryland was purchased by Six Flags, which just went through a major merger and they started closing parks. So they announced that park was going to close. And a good friend of mine who, grew up in Hull with us said, "Hey, did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We got to go." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We got to get down there before it closes. We haven't ridden that in 40 years.
Oh my goodness.
And when you think of it, wow, it was 40 years.
And it goes by like that.
Yeah, I didn't even like, and again, I'm a history guy, right? So I should know this stuff. And I said, damn it, you're right. We haven't ridden in 40 years. So um, he and his brother and I we're all good friends. We drove down and we took the last ride. We start, talking to people down there, and they were saying that others from this area were coming down to, kind of get the last ride, and telling them, that they were coming from the Boston area. And then of course we do it a couple of times and we walk around the park. And then as we were coming back, it got stuck on the top. We weren't in it at the time,
Mm.
looking up, and it's stuck at the top. And I was like, well, that's just fitting, isn't it? That it's going out that way. It wasn't the very last day, but it was close to it. So, but
the roller coaster is got what's the result? What's going to happen with it?
they still have not indicated what was going to happen. It was actually the oldest, not the oldest. I think it was the second oldest operating roller coaster at the time. It opened in 1917, in Paragon. So there is value to it. There's among other places. But again, if I can do that newspaper analogy, with all of the consolidations in the amusement park business, there's not a lot of places to go. So there's not a lot of places that are going to want to do that.
It's really hard to picture Hull with the park in place, but it was such, I mean, when I was a
So
kid,
much fun.
$7 or $10 to get an all-day pass, and you rode that roller coaster time after time after time until you were,
No,
you
once and
sick
done.
of
Once and done.
Once and done for you.
Roller coaster I've ever rode, and I've never rode one again. That
Really?
93 drop,
Yeah.
I can still feel that. No,
That's
but I
tough.
did everything else.
One of the coolest things, you can go on YouTube and you can search Hull, Paragon Park roller coaster, and that somebody has videotaped. It might have been you, I don't know. Videotaped being on the roller coaster, and
Oh,
you can
no, I've
see
seen
the
that.
view of Hull. You can see the view of Hull all around the area. It's really incredible, and the time difference, and you can see what it looks like. It's very interesting.
It's cool. And the other thing about the park being a place that carried a lot of memories was, people always talk about, well, what was the big deal? Like, it wasn't that everyone was a theme park aficionado. It was just that there was no admission fee. So you could walk in and not spend any money if you didn't have any money. But you could hang out with your friends and you could see your friends. Many of your friends probably worked there. And you could spend the day just sort of walking around and being there and being involved in it. And sort of, it was a gathering place. And I think that's why it kind of holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts, because, today when you go to a theme park, or even a Canopy Lake is the closest one probably to it in New Hampshire, there's still a large admission fee. You go in, it's an expensive day to be there. This was a place you could just walk in off the beach and get something to eat and hang around, sit, see what was going on, and talk to people. So there's a lot there. But I think to answer your original question, Jerry, yeah, my grandfather did have a few stories about, breaking up some fights or some, when there were a lot of people there late into the night, it would go 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Was not unusual for there to be crowds. Not trouble, not problems, but a different time. Because now when you drive through town in the summer, 8, 9 o'clock at night, everything's dark.
The MDC literally has a policy where the lots down by Schooners get closed 10 o'clock at night.
Yes.
They've been closing them a little bit early, 9:45, and it's difficult for the businesses, but it's so different. They want it quiet down there. And,
Yeah.
how can you complain about that? It's people kind of prefer, I think, in general, a little more calm.
You and I were talking about Nantasket Flats earlier today, Jerry, and that's part of the reason their business kind of fell, is because they don't want the loud music. People, there's a dichotomy, I guess. Some people on Friday and Saturdays want to hear the outdoor music in the summertime. Then there's people that don't want to hear it after a certain time. And how do you balance that?
Yeah. And I think there was a time period too, where that lateness and see, we grew up there, like our home our family home was in the middle of it all. So we heard, when boats came to the Nantasket Pier, you could hear the music off the boats. You could hear the music and the music from Paragon. You could hear the noise from the beachfront. It was a different, it was different, and it's not better or worse. It's just different. And I think that's one of the things that some people in town struggle with is, everything evolves, Hull evolves, and it's changing now from a summer economy to a more year-round economy. I think one of the podcasts, I don't know if it was with Peter, Jerry, I remember you mentioning, that half of the alphabets used to be empty during the winter, because they were.
I mentioned that absolutely. At least 50% of the houses on the alphabet streets where I lived and around that area were summer houses, and they were locked up for the entire winter.
Yeah. And the businesses too. I mean, we had so many seasonal licenses. It wasn't unusual to drive by and see, I was going to say the dry dock, but now it's, Daddy's.
Dry dock. That's what I remember it as when I first hit it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And, it would have board on the window and say, see you in the spring, and that was okay. Or, that was the way it was. And,
What
so
was
there's,
it? Oh, Uncle
there's
Sam.
year-roundness.
That's what it was. Sorry. When you said the surf earlier, I couldn't remember Uncle Sam's.
I'm going to say, Jake, you must have a couple of questions. You've been a little bit quiet. Come on.
Oh,
Much.
I do. Chris, I would actually like to hear a little bit more about your history, right? Did you go to school? You talked a little bit about school.
Mhm.
You got into writing, what your career has been, and
Yeah, sure.
of how you continued with the whole times, and what your role is now. If you could talk a little bit about that history of yourself and the whole times, I think it would be really helpful.
Geez, I was hoping to avoid talking about myself, but okay. So
Actually, can I add one thing, Jake?
yeah, sure.
I hear you're an award-winning journalist from Susan. So I'm here. I want you to weave that in.
Well, yeah, sure. So thank you for that. But yes, so I did pursue a degree in journalism. And I went to NYU, which people go, oh, NYU. But 35 years ago, it wasn't as hard to get into, I guess, as it is now. But they also had I halfway through my journalism degree, so I worked at the school newspaper there and did an internship at New York Newsday, which I always say, if you ever watched Everybody Loves Raymond, he worked at Newsday, and that's the paper I worked at. My dad would do this thing where he would, when he went into Boston, and if I knew I had a story coming out, I would call home, and because again, no email or anything like that, call home and say, I got something in, I think it's coming out tomorrow. So he'd go over to Out of Town News in Harvard Square,
Oh my
pick
goodness.
up a copy of the paper so he could see it.
That is awesome.
And then he'd call me and tell me all the things I probably should have done differently if I had, if I'd called him first, but he was doing it, he was on it. So I did that. And then halfway through my journalism degree, my advisor said, but what are you going to do when you get out of school? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you can write. You have that. This is all this degree shows you, is that you can write. You have to have some other background. You have to have some other specialty, some other field of knowledge. I said, well, thanks for telling me. I'm, halfway through. So at the time, NYU had a program that was they called it Metropolitan Studies. Now it would be called Public Administration.
Interesting.
That's what they're,
Kind of like the School of Government, Harvard.
Yes. Yeah. So my degree, I ended up with a double major because I said, well, I'm finishing the journalism degree. I'm already almost through with it. And I did this, what was called Metropolitan Studies, and New York City was a great place to do that in.
Sure.
Because they literally took you out onto the streets and said, here are these types of buildings. So talking about zoning, urban renewal, the city, it's a different approach because it's city government, but sitting in on city planning hearings, in New York, it's not the city council, it's the board of estimate, or at least it was. Different, another different approach, but also learning how these people pull together, and how government works. Because when you're writing about something, you have to understand how it works.
Absolutely.
And I can tell when I read something in another publication, say, these people don't understand how town meeting works, or they don't understand. And it's not a knock against them. It's just, it's clear that they're not familiar enough with the process to fully understand it. So that was kind of cool. And so I would have stayed in New York if I could have, first of all, afforded it. But it was also the recession time. And so nobody was hiring. So I came back after school. I came back to Hull, and Susan was gracious enough to hire me as the full-time editor of the Times. And so I worked there for 5 years as the full-time editor, learned a ton. It was one of those situations where because we were so small, and because I also wanted to learn, and I was young and dumb, I would do anything they asked me to do. So I did
Guilty.
everything but sell ads. I'm not a good ad salesperson. But I did layout. I did, and layout, I mean, cut and paste, actual cut and paste. And the other thing,
So,
do you remember that? Yeah.
well, I do, because I worked in a marketing group before. When we do project sheets, and we'd have to bring them to the on-site repro. But if we were doing a marketing piece, we'd have to send it out, and you'd have to have your PMS colors all picked out,
Yes.
and you'd have the letters. It was a big
and
deal.
also-
You had to proof that so many times to make sure it was perfect. 'Cause you
Cut
could
out
only
where the images went. And make
Yep.
sure, yeah.
the graphic designers had little razor blades to.
Yes.
Yep.
So we had to learn that. And because we were always late getting to the press, we would print at the Mariner. I learned how the press works, because they would say, if you're not here in an hour, we're sending the guys home. So we would go down there and we would help them with pre-press. So I learned a ton. I learned a lot. And, we did everything that everything that goes into how to, manage the paper. And then after that, I moved on a little bit to, wanted to broaden my horizons. I went to work for the Tab. I don't know if you remember the Tab newspapers. They were out in not Western Mass, but the Western suburbs, Newton, Wellesley. So
Big. Because I worked in one town for a while. I wouldn't say I had it.
yeah. Oh, I think so. Yep.
Mhm.
And then went from there to Banker and Tradesman, which is a real estate publication.
Oh, I love that paper.
Yeah. Well, as an
I didn't
attorney.
realize I used to read that religiously.
Yes. So I was the residential real estate reporter for them. And then worked, we started then I left there and started a publication in Boston called Boston Homes, which was, we started out in 5 neighborhoods: Waterfront, North End, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, and South End, on real estate. And our big innovation at the time, this is late 90s, was a fax number that you could call up and they would fax you. Now, I don't know who had a fax, but they would fax you the open house listings for that weekend. If you, on Friday, you could have them fax you. But then we also were delivering, to everybody's doorstep.
I remember that magazine. Yeah.
It was kind of cool. It existed for a while until a couple years ago, I think. And then from there, I met Jack Conway, who has the company that, has his name on it. And he said, I forget the exact way that he phrased it, but he said something like, "Oh, one day, you'll come work for me." And I said, "No, I think I'm kind of happy where I am." And he said, "All the best people work for me." And I said, "Well, all right. How do you argue with that?" So I went and worked with the Conway Company for a total of 16 years.
Wow.
In the marketing department, in the education department, and then we did operations. But now during all these times, I'm talking about working in other places, I'm still contributing to the
Right.
Times in various capacities, certainly not, at the level that I had been. So there's, you never quite get away from it. And then, in the middle there was a period where I did come back for a while. Susan had toyed with the idea of retiring, and then decided she wasn't retired. So she did. And then, I worked for, my current job. I'm the finance director for a special ed collaborative, in New Bedford. So
Really?
yeah, it's a little different, but it's something it's quite rewarding, actually. I always say I'm not a clinician. I don't do the work, but I keep the lights on so that they can do the work that they have to do. And it's great. We have programs for school age children through, high school, and then for adults over age 22. So all during this time, I've been working with the folks with the Times and contributing in various capacities. And then when Susan did decide that it was time to retire, she sold the paper to Tom Hoy and Patty Abbott.
My landlord.
Yes. Yep. Loan South Shore Senior News. And they wanted to take the paper in a different direction. Susan was very strong editorially, and had a lot of, the paper was advocating and sort of leading the conversation, in different directions. Their idea was to, sort of calm that piece of it and be a little more, be more open to, just serving the community and being a sounding board where, all opinions are welcome. Of course, all opinions were welcome before, but it was just a different approach. And so Patty, was the editor. Tom sold ads and did whatever he did until Patty, unfortunately got sick. And she passed away in 2022. But before she did, she said, I need your help. And again, this is somebody, someone asked you to help. I said, what do you need me to do? Just like the guy with the camera bag, I didn't ask what that was, what that meant. And she said, well, I'm not sure, some weeks I might not be up to doing, the job. If I call you and say, I need you to fill in, can you do it? Sure. No problem at all. And then that just led to, she ended up, passing away in 2022. And so I was in that role and have continued to be in that role. Tom continues to own the paper. We have a great team there. Cheryl Killian, who works there, grew up in Hull. She's been there like me, off and on for, since she was a teenager. Before that, her mother did that job.
Wow.
Peter has been the cartoonist for 30 something year. Skip takes photos. He's been, around for a long
It's
time.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yes.
And
He does work on the League of Women Voters for us sometimes.
Yep. And Carol Meyer, we stole Carol from the Hingham paper, some years ago. She lives in Hingham, but she's a professional journalist. She knows what she's doing.
She absolutely does.
There's a ton of good people. I wish we had, the ability to have a bigger staff. I wish we had the ability to have bigger papers. But it's a passion project in a lot of ways. And I think that's why it works.
I hear Patty was quite the photographer as well.
She was fantastic. The museum did the Lifesaving Museum did an exhibition of her work a couple of years ago. Just fantastic. I mean, so if you go on the website, hulltimes.com, and there's a banner photo on each page. Those are all hers. Those are all her images. They're unbelievable.
Really quick story. When I decided to take the space that I'm never in because I'm always on the road, I was debating. And this is what's interesting. It was a little ad in the paper. I was reading it one afternoon. I saw it, and I said, that sounds kind of cool. Called Tom. He showed it to me, and I'm still thinking about it. And Jake knows this about me. Sometimes I don't act. Jake's far more decisive. I ponder. And so I'm walking out, and he shows me this picture of a snowy white owl that's in the lobby.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you've seen 100 times. He tells me the story of how Patty took it in Situate. And my father, God rest his soul, he died young at 59. some point he decided that I liked owls. I didn't decide this. Anytime we went on trips, I got owl souvenirs, owl earrings, owl statues.
Wow.
Sitting there thinking, I always think he sends me signs. So I'm sitting there thinking, and then he's like, oh, before you leave, I got to show you the snowy white owl. And I looked up, I'm like, all right, I'll take it. And so that's how I went to, again, like almost like another fate thing. And a theme I'm hearing from you is, you said it earlier, just when I thought I was going to get out, they pull me back in. There's something that keeps you connected.
Mhm.
I now have a greater appreciation for 50 years ago today and all after listening to you. And one quick question, with the 250th anniversary planning, are they tapping into you as a resource for that?
Yeah. So I'm also involved in the Historical Society, but it doesn't, hasn't really existed. That's another long story. There were some great people that were involved in that, but one of the things that they didn't do well was build membership. So some of the original guys, quick story, Mr. Gillis, Jerry, you'll remember Mr. Gillis.
He was my CCD teacher, and
Oh my goodness.
I shouldn't say this. I apologize. He also was my bail bondsman for the
Yes.
one time I might have gotten in a little trouble.
Yes.
I lived with trouble once and all too.
Yeah.
Way
I think
back.
everyone's had a little run in with someone, but yes, he was the clerk of courts for a while. He was a retired police officer. He was involved with the Historical Society. Great guy. His daughter Maureen is involved at the museum.
Phenomenal guy, phenomenal lady. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I worked at the paper, we used to be in the office. Our office used to be where the cat shelter is now, in Kinburma. Came in one day and said, hey, let's take a walk. So I did. He brought me a cup of coffee, Weinberg's and a bagel. So something's coming, right? You're not just going to get that. He said, I need you to do me a favor. And, he was the kind of guy that when he says that to you, you don't ask any questions. You say, what is it? What do you need me to do? So we went next door to the bank, which at the time was Hull Cooperative Bank. And I think Mrs. Saturno was working there and had the paperwork to put my name onto the Historical Society bank accounts, because he said, I'm the last one and I'm not going to live forever. I need somebody who can sort of do this. And then, so of course I'm there. I'm signing my name. I don't know what I'm signing. And he said, come out to my car. And so we did. And there was this box of stuff, and it was the paperwork and records from the Historical Society. One of the things that had happened was the people that were involved, they didn't keep up with the paperwork, and they didn't have the stuff, organized, and things sort of fell apart. And there was a great archive at the top floor of the village fire station, collectioned over the years as people had donated photographs and artifacts. And there's an old ballot box that they used to, stuff with all the old, the votes. And here's the key to that. He said, don't worry, you won't have to do anything, and while I'm still alive. Nobody lives forever. So when the time came around, there's always a group of people that want to revitalize the society, and we've tried over time, and you get excited about it, you start to do things, and then sort of life takes over and things fall apart. Well, we did get everything back together. The paperwork is in order, where, all the 501c3 stuff is ready to go. The insurance is paid. But now the building is being renovated, and we moved the stuff out of the way of the construction. It's in storage now at the Memorial School. Hopefully we'll get it back in there and can open up to display some of it, because that's the part that I think is most important, is to get this stuff on display so people can. There's some great stuff. We did have some scanning. The Brian at the library is working on scanning some of the documents and scanning some of the old newspapers, so that they're searchable. We're trying to do a lot of this. And I think once we kind of get our physical location back, we'll be able to do that, and kind of take a better inventory of what we have and do some displays and some stuff. But that's the thing, I think, the 250. And then, as we kind of celebrate Hull, there are different anniversaries that are coming up. putting the stuff out there and getting people to get excited about it. I think that's, one of the best.
I'm a history nerd actually, and I was a history minor in my undergrad.
Oh,
And
perfect.
love-
You're an archivist. Can we get you to help us archive?
I'm happy to. I would like to work at something like that because I think that's just community spirited. How can you not? It's not
Absolutely
controversial.
is. Yeah.
It's
it
no
is.
controversial. It's just showcasing the place that we all love, and it's
Yeah.
evolution, as you said. Everything evolves.
You got
I-
involved. You got involved at a higher level at the age of 13, and that's why he chose. Did you say it was Mr. Saturno?
Mrs. Saturno. Yeah.
Oh, Mrs. Okay.
Mrs. Willis got me involved, but Mrs. Saturno was at the bank. She was ready. She had all the paperwork ready.
So, Chris, Hull is, in my view, unique partially because of its geography, right? If you look at neighboring towns, Hingham is a great example. I always talk about. It's like Hingham. There's a lot of wealth there. There's a lot of things in Hingham, but so many people pass through Hingham or maybe Weymouth, whatever. Right? Weymouth is a very old place as well, in terms of the history of this country. And of course, the Commonwealth is what started this country. It's our fault. So we started the experiment. But when we get to Hull, Hull is unique because no one goes through Hull to get to somewhere else. Hull is a destination. When I first bought a house here and moved to Hull back in 2017, before my friends ever saw it or family, I explained to them that it's unlike anywhere else I've ever been because it is a destination. It is not a conduit to get to anywhere else. Everyone here has to actively choose to be here. So it's different, right?
Absolutely true, Jake.
Yeah. And part of the spirit, the sense of community that's here, I think has a different character because of that. And a lot of people never seem to frame it that way. But if you kind of take that lens, and look at what you know about the people of Hull historically and now, do you see, you said it's changing, yes, but do you also see one thing that's constant sort of because of that, or do you see something else? Basically, I'm trying to look for your unique take on, well, things are a certain way in Hull, it's special because of this. That's my view of why it's special. But what do you see?
So that's a good way to kind of phrase it is that, you're here because you want to be here, or, someone brought you here, as when you were young and you have grown up here and you love it. I think what's interesting to me is that different people bring to Hull different perspectives from, someone who, didn't grow up here and now, they're coming in with a different world experience and different views. I'll never forget, the first $1 million house, being sold in Hull. I remember saying to I knew the agent, a real estate agent, and I said, that house isn't worth $1 million. And she said, well, you think that, others might think that, but someone coming in and seeing where it's located, it was up on, Green Hill on Summit, the location, the view, all of that, they're bringing in a different look, a different view. And they paid $1 million for that house. And then of course, now that's, the midpoint of houses being sold in Hull. So
Amazing that I actually did this research that since 2023, property values have increased 49% in Hull.
really,
Yep.
that's interesting to know that specific statistic. I think that's interesting. I think there's other things that have happened. So, when we talk a little bit about, Paragon, it's 40 years ago. That's 2 generations, right? I mean, that's a long time. And, so I think there's a little bit of perspective where you have to, if you think about the carousel, there are people that only know the carousel in its location as it is now. They don't know it as part of something bigger. There are people, I don't want to divert us even further, but I'll say there are people who drive through the HRA land and, it's always been an open parcel. They know that something was there, but it's not meaningful because they don't remember it. They go to, think of it this way: there will be a group of people who don't have a connection to the memorial school that others might have because they didn't attend there. There are other. The passage of time, I think, and the turnover in residents is significant because people are thinking of Hull in a different way. Jerry and I are close in age and have sort of similar perspectives on what it was like when we were younger and what it's like now. You, Kim and Jake, you guys have a different look from having seen other places, coming here, seeing it, and then going out and then coming back. And, you've sort of seen a different,
I remember riding my bikes with my girlfriends from South Weymouth.
Mhm.
We were at Paragon Park, and as you said, I'm trying to, I started to think if they were bike racks and we locked them up or whatever, but
Yeah.
we'd go to the beach and then we'd go to the park and then we'd go to the beach, go to the park, and then we'd ride home, or we'd stop in Wapatuck and then come down here. And, so it was a big part of my childhood. And then my very first solo apartment in my early 20s was here. And then I came back again, and it's actually settled by Kingston upon Hull from England.
yes. Yeah.
And
Right.
so I think it's kind of fitting that I returned because Kingston is upon Hull again. I
Yeah.
just saw history.com to see if there's some sort of connection there, because I am a history nerd a little bit too.
Great
I'm
question.
calling you a nerd.
Yeah,
I'm a history
great
nerd.
question.
What's that?
That's a great question. I was giving one of my questions is, you must have, with your history background, some connection or some experience with Hull, England, right?
So, yeah. So, yes, there's a little bit there. I've corresponded with some folks over there. We actually it's funny. You would think that, people would check the website before they email us, but we often get, inquiries from, Hull, England at the, our hulltimes.com website, which is kind of strange.
This happens a lot in Hull, right? Hull have lots of Facebook groups,
Yes.
and I'm not directly involved with Hull Pride, but I go to as many of the events I can. And all
Yep.
the time, there are people in England who are like, "Oh, this sounds great. We're going to come."
I was on a plane across the pond.
Yeah.
It's profound. So we get these posts on the
That's
Hull
funny.
Pride Facebook page where people are like, "This is thousands of miles away. This isn't fair." And then they finally figure it out. There's a Hull, Massachusetts as well.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting collaborative to get the Hull.
Right. Yeah, we get like
or two.
from mileage.
Yeah. The world
So,
is a lot bigger and a lot smaller than you think.
Yeah. Oddly enough, I worked over there for quite a while. I was probably
Really?
working 2.5 years in the UK,
Oh wow.
staying there 3 weeks at a time. And what was cool was I went to all these different locations, central London, down south, learned a lot about the history down south. The gentleman told me they fortified the streets along the coast because of all the armor they brought in. We were drilling through the streets, and it was about 4 feet of concrete. And we're like, what is this? We've never seen it. There's no reason for it. And there was an old timer who told us the whole story. So it's just incredible over there. But Hastings, England had fishing villages with fishing sheds or structures that were 2 stories high, small, but they were for drying nets. And I'd never seen that before in a fishing community, as an example. Yeah. But Hull, I never made it to Hull, but I know it's they have a soccer team from there. It's a pretty sustainable town. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've seen information on the soccer team, and it's kind of cool to think about, that there is that connection. But I wanted to kind of come back to what Jake had said about what makes it unique and what's different. I think that what we're seeing is a different demographic in Hull. One of the things that made Hull interesting and unique, Kim, you said it, you came back for your first solo apartment. It was affordable.
Mhm.
And I say was affordable because it's becoming less affordable. But we're also seeing a different demographic too. Birth rates on the whole are down, but number of children, the population of Hull under 18 is shrinking. And that's due to, people coming to, who are buying some former summer homes or smaller homes and building larger retirement type homes. There was a time in the 70s when Hull was overcrowded. Hull schools were overcrowded. And now, as we've seen, the student population has dropped. I don't know if that's going to swing back again, but it could. The opportunity for the population to grow again is there. But I think there's a different approach now, or a different perspective now, because the types of people who live here are different. There's the people who are of an age that are older are not looking, they're looking for amenities that families might not be looking for. I think that's an important piece, because as the town starts to figure out what its priorities are, it has to reflect the current population, has to reflect who's here now, what those folks are looking.
That's your planning background talking right there.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It is. I mean, and you're absolutely right about
Right?
that.
We need a bigger and better, senior center or community center. I always wonder. I always thought it was strange that every town, not just around here, says that, well, there's a senior center and a community center or a youth center. Like, it should just be a center for everybody. I think we kind of parcel it out differently, which is kind of strange to me.
It
I
seems,
Oh,
you're absolutely right. It's the entire point. It's a community center, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
really is.
I have some hope, and maybe it's pie in the sky. I'm one of the few people that stood in support of the Paragon project, because what I liked about it is that it's rentals, that it's year round, that they're going to have commercial uses on the first floor, and it's my hope that it will activate some of the restaurants downtown. The sandbar people like that, Mambo's.
Yeah,
What
sure.
are they going to put in there that we might want to go to? Because the winters down here, let's be honest, are brutal. So you have to really love Hull to stay in Hull, because as Jake says, it is a destination, and you stay here. So you don't want to drive too far. Kind of good, but to your point about children, I'm guessing the price point is going to be high.
Yeah.
But would a young couple start out there, and would they have kids there, and then maybe if they're affording that, would they then look for their forever home somewhere down on the peninsula? I don't know. That could be pie in the sky, but that's kind of my hope.
Yeah. Well, I think, the Paragon project is not as offensive as some people think it is. I wish they had gotten more creative with the architecture, and maybe not try to sandwich in as much as they did. But you're right. I do like the mixed use there. I think that's important. I think that, the problem with, if you look at again, I'm going to go off on a strange tangent here, but if you look at the Horizons building, besides it just being ugly,
That's where my aunt lives.
oh, really? Yeah. Well,
And she has a Paragon carousel coffee table, because she's right on the roller coaster site.
perfect.
Or condo.
But that whole front, there's commercial. There's supposed to be commercial there. But it's so far
Yep.
the sidewalk, and it's not connected at all to, where you want to be. At least this new development is got right on the sidewalk. It's going right there for you. So maybe there's, maybe you're right. Maybe there's something there that,
And then they're going to do on the other side. I mean, the streetscape that they're going to do a lot of improvements. At least it's going to make, I think, is that still that's George Washington Boulevard until you get to Mesmar, right?
Yep.
I think that you'll see more complete streets going there where people can ride bikes, walk. I'm hoping. This is my hope.
well, we need optimism. We definitely need optimism.
I know you're right about, because it has had a lot of pessimism on the project, but they had a good architect. Procopio, I think, for developers is a pretty reputable firm. We could have done worse. To your point about the buildings that were thrown up in the 80s, I was just having this conversation. My aunt lives on the Horizons, and they didn't think about what the salt water would do to the facade, and they didn't think about the winds. And so when it started to deteriorate on the ocean side, they couldn't even repoint it because they just didn't plan for it. Now, she lives on the bay, so that didn't get the wear and tear. Front did. But if you live in a condo, doesn't matter.
Right.
Everybody pays the bills.
Yeah.
So I do think that Procopio coming in 2026, they understand what you have to do for resilience. And they understand compensatory flood storage. They understand stormwater runoff. We understand the type of plants that need to be in this environment. So again, I'm
I don't think
I'm
I don't think
hopeful.
you're going to find any families moving into that development. I might be wrong, but
No, I'm saying young couples
Yeah.
that might move from
right
there.
now,
Peninsula.
what I'm seeing, the younger generation is Hull is not affordable. You know, I think Christian being a little kind, it's not
That was
affordable.
my
And the commute's a problem, and they're looking at in other communities, and I don't know what the answer is. It's nobody's fault. It's the market, right?
Yeah, I mean, until we figure out a way to build, cheaper housing, but I don't know that we ever will.
and
Not
we have
just
a
in all.
density issue already. I mean, where are you going to put?
Yeah.
I just read this statistic too, and I'm going to say it wrong, but our land area is like 2.7 miles, but our density, it's a 4-to-1 ratio for the entire state.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at that.
So you look that up on Wikipedia. My mind doesn't work mathematically like that. It took me a second to grasp that, but there's, town of Florida, Massachusetts. I don't know how many residents are there. I just learned, it's one of the towns you don't even know of. Or something like, way out by North Adams. But the amount of people that are on this peninsula is insane. If you think about it, we're all on top of each other, really. So where do you build? And I don't want to turn this into a planning and development discussion, but to Jerry's point, the affordability issue is a real one.
I agree.
We shouldn't keep Chris all night, so I'm going to summarize by saying I'm going to do the compliment at the end. I graduated with his brother Tim, and I think the family structure was such that, and I came from a much different one, as both my parents were Italian immigrants, and they had to, go through that whole difficulty, but very structured. I think the one thing I excelled at was math, and your brother was always in my advanced math classes, and he went on to a extremely decorated military career as well. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about your family, and as we kind of try to close this out the next couple minutes, I think these guys might have questions too.
Sure. Yeah. So my older brother, Tim, he lives in Hull now. He went to the Citadel in South Carolina and was spent 10 years in the Navy. His boys are also in the military as well. So they're, they also understand the idea of service. My brother, Pat, lives in Norwell and is until most recently was involved in the finance committee, like my dad. Not, you can't help it. You have to be involved. You have to do that kind of thing.
That's the right answer.
Well, it's true. And my mom worked for 30 years at the Hingham Court. She was the person in the clerk's office who, when you would go in and ask, where jury duty was or where you had to pay your ticket, she was the person who directed you there and answered the phone when you called. So she used to say, I don't work at lottery headquarters. I'm not seeing people on their best day. But she tried to give them a little bit of grace for their, time that, this was something that, they didn't want to be there, but they helped. So,
I met her.
You probably did. Yeah, she worked there with a couple of, there are a couple of folks that are still in town who, worked there. There was a good group of people. There still is, different generation of people there now. The passage of time, as it happens, but it's a great, community. And I think that, you can't help but be inspired to want to give back. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing. And I think this is one of the great things about what you're doing here is that you're highlighting people who have that same spirit and, people who others may not know or may have heard of or, don't have the ability to have met, but now are able to do that through this venue, which I think is fantastic. So I wish you all the success for this and hope it continues. And I think I've sent Kim a couple of suggestions. I may send a few more as I think of people, who just have good stories to tell.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're looking for.
That's exactly the goal. Yeah.
That's the whole point. Tell the stories of the people of Hull.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that when you see people and you talk to them, you get a whole different perspective, and you realize how people are contributing in ways you never knew. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a lot more that, we have a lot more in common with each other than we think, really.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. But you don't know that until you talk to them,
Yeah. I mean, like I call us the trilogy, but for, we found out we formed based on what we had more in common. And it's really, for me, it's very rewarding getting to know Jake and launching this.
And there's a history in Hull too. People talk about the good old days, but it really did exist where you could go to a meeting about some event, a political, selectmen's meeting or some planning board meeting or HRA meeting of some sort, and disagree and not and feel that way. But then the next day you're at the Boy Scout thing, serving, soup or something, like there was not this division, that if we always have to be agreeing on everything, or, there was this idea that you could be, together in some ways and separate in other ways. And that was fine. And that was okay.
It's an interesting point, Chris, because I think for me, the last decade has really widened that division. And I think that's also part of our goal, to your point, finding the commonalities to try to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I have great relationships with people who I completely disagree with on many things, but because you can just talk about it, and it's, you don't have to, dislike someone because you disagree with them. And I think unfortunately, there's a lot of that feeling out there that, people aren't able to separate. And I think that, by having the ability to talk to each other through venues like this, but also, that's one of the things about, I know we're doing this, online, but having in-person meetings and talking to people, it gives you that ability to, sort of talk about things that you might not talk about otherwise, and build relationships. But I think that's a great thing.
I'll add to that, Chris. What I think is really important, especially if we're talking about politics where people have really different positions, it's to take an approach where the goal is not to convince anyone of anything. The goal is to just understand, explain why you feel that way, explain why you support this policy, understand that person's position. Don't have to agree or disagree, right? But the whole point of discourse is to just understand each other. If you understand each other, you can actually find, oh, well, I agree with this part of why you support this policy, but I don't support the policy at all. But you just found something in common. And now we can talk about how we can agree on a piece of something without necessarily agreeing on a whole policy. And I think that more people are capable of this than what maybe the system or the man wants us to know. And so I'm hoping that is the direction that, at least in Hull, things go, because that's how we progress. That's American, I think. So
no, I agree with you. And just understanding why you came to the position you came to, I think that's huge. Understanding, oh, all right, we're not going to agree on that, but I see what went through your head and why you're thinking that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. It's very good.
Well, thanks for doing everything that you do with the Hull Times. And
thank you.
Maybe let's run again for a history lesson.
Yeah, we could talk about that kind of stuff anytime. There's others who I think could, make some, talk about some of the time that they actually lived through and have some great stories about. But I'm excited to see what else, who else you come up with. I think this is a great thing, and I hope I hope people get excited about wanting to participate too.
I think we are getting. I think people are. We have a list. We have a growing list.
Oh, that's great.
So
I'm just going to close up by saying you go on my list of people who, after I go through all the details and understand, your entire background, I feel worse about myself. I don't do enough, type of thing. You know what I mean?
Get with it, Jerry. Come on.
Jerry, you do a lot. You do a lot. You do a lot.
Stop
You
it,
do.
Jerry. You're doing the service, which is important, and I think that is part of the thing, I'm going to give you a compliment in that there are many people who talk about things that should be different, but they don't always put their money where their mouth is and put the time in to actually serve. And that's what you do. That's what Jake does. You know, and that's what all of us are doing, you know, by trying to just do a little part of what we can do. So you know, I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And I thank you for doing that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
And also everyone subscribe to the Times, go to hulltimes.com.
I subscribe, and my aunt and uncle, they love that I get that for Christmas every year. It's the
Oh,
favorite part of their
perfect. There you
week.
go.
Favorite part of their week.
You get to a person who has everything.
And
Exactly. They love it. They're like, we just love this. And they look forward to it every Friday.
so
So,
subscribe to the Hull Times, but also subscribe to Hull Heart, right?
Yes.
yes,
That's
like
true
and
both.
subscribe.
There you go.
I look forward to the Hull Times every week. Like
Me
I
too.
can't explain it.
Me
Wow.
too, in the same exact way. And I have been on round 2. This is Hull 2.0 for me. And I liked it. I don't remember. Was it the Hull Times in the early 90s?
I have to start
was.
writing more.
Yeah,
I have to
okay.
start writing more letters to the editor or something.
Yeah, get some
You're
going.
right. I have to get more involved.
Come on,
Great
Jeff.
point.
We're waiting.
Great
for
point.
Jake doesn't write enough to letters to the editor, does he?
you. No, you know,
I'm,
we
I'm,
got him on the limit.
I'm messing with it. I'm messing with it. Very nice to meet you, Chris, in person.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having
thanks.
me. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
All right.
Have a great night, everyone.
Guys.
Good night, guys.
I think, yeah.